The sound of tiny footsteps on creaking floorboards broke the morning silence. 8-year-old Amara tiptoed to the kitchen, her small hands trembling as she opened cabinet after cabinet, finding nothing but empty shelves and a few crumbs. Her stomach had been growling for 2 days now, and the dizzy spells were getting worse. Behind her, she heard her mama's weak voice calling out, "Baby, come back to bed. Don't wake your daddy." But Amara couldn't stop looking. She knew her mama, Denise, was just as hungry as she was. Maybe hungrier. The beautiful woman who used to sing while cooking Sunday dinner now barely had strength to lift her head. Her dark skin had grown pale, her once bright eyes now hollow with exhaustion and worry. 3 months ago, everything changed when Robert Parker lost his job at the factory. Instead of looking for new work, he spent his days drinking and his nights yelling. The grocery money disappeared. The bills piled up. And somehow, in his twisted mind, it became Denise's fault. It became Amara's fault. They didn't deserve to eat, he said. They were the reason for all his problems. You want food? Get a job, Robert would sneer at Denise, knowing full well he wouldn't let her leave the house. He controlled everything, the car keys, the bank account, even the phone. The doors stayed locked from the inside and Robert kept the only key. Amara found a half-empty jar of peanut butter hidden behind some old boxes. Her hands shook as she unscrewed the lid. She took the smallest spoonful and let it dissolve slowly on her tongue, trying to make it last. Then she took another tiny amount on her finger and walked quietly back to her mama's room. "Mama," she whispered, "I found some." Denise's eyes filled with tears as her daughter fed her the peanut butter, one small fingertip at a time. This was no way for a child to live. No way for anyone to live. But the doors were locked, the phone was hidden, and Robert watched them like a hawk. "We're going to be okay, baby girl," Denise whispered, though she didn't believe it herself. "God's going to make a way." Outside their window, the neighborhood was waking up. Other families were getting ready for work and school, having breakfast, living normal lives. Denise pressed her face to the glass and saw Mrs. Ruby next door watering her flowers. The older woman looked up at the window and for just a moment their eyes met. Something passed between them, a recognition, a knowing look that said more than words could express. Mrs. Ruby had lived in that house for 40 years. She'd seen things, heard things through the thin walls that connected their row houses. The sounds had been getting worse lately. Less talking, more silence. And silence, she knew, could be more dangerous than shouting. Back in the kitchen, Robert sat at the table with a full plate of eggs and bacon he'd bought just for himself. He ate slowly, deliberately, making sure the smell filled the house. Making sure his family knew what they were missing. This was control. This was power. This was how he showed them who was in charge. "Maybe if you learned to be grateful," he called out toward the bedroom, "things would be different around here." But things were about to become very different indeed. Because Mrs. Ruby was still watching. Still listening. And she'd made a decision that would change everything. As the morning sun climbed higher, Amara curled up next to her mama on the thin mattress. Both of them were getting weaker each day. Denise could feel her daughter's ribs through her nightgown. She could see the way Amara's clothes hung loose on her small frame. "Mama, why doesn't Daddy love us anymore?" Amara asked in a voice so quiet it was almost lost in the morning air. Denise closed her eyes and held her daughter closer. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes grown-ups forget how to love? How do you tell a child that the man who should protect them has become the very thing they need protection from? He's sick, baby. Real sick in his heart and his mind. But that's not your fault. That's not our fault." Through the wall, they could hear Robert moving around, getting ready to leave for another day of drinking and complaining at the corner store. He'd be gone for hours, but the doors would stay locked. The phone would stay hidden. They would stay trapped. But Mrs. Ruby was still watching. And today she was going to do something about it. Mrs. Ruby Washington had seen enough. 40 years in the same house had taught her to read the signs. The way sound traveled through these old walls, she'd heard Robert's angry voice getting louder and the responses getting quieter. She'd seen Denise at the window looking thinner each week. And yesterday she'd caught a glimpse of little Amara in the backyard, picking dandelions and eating them. No child should be that hungry in America. Not in 2025. Not on her watch. Ruby sat at her kitchen table with her morning coffee and her phone. At 72 she'd learned patience, but she'd also learned when patience wasn't enough anymore. Her arthritis made her fingers stiff, but her mind was sharp as ever. She'd raised 6 children of her own, buried a husband, and helped more neighbors than she could count. This situation called for wisdom, not just good intentions. First, she called her nephew Jerome, who worked for the police department. "Baby, I need you to listen real careful," she said when he answered. I got a situation next door that's been eating at me for weeks now. Jerome knew his aunt wasn't one to panic or exaggerate. When Ruby Washington called with concerns, people listened. What's going on, Aunt Ruby? She told him about the sounds, the locked doors, the way Denise looked at that window with desperation in her eyes. She told him about catching Amara eating weeds from the yard. I can't see them being hurt and do nothing, she finished. But I need to be smart about this. That man's got a temper and I don't want to make things worse for them. Jerome was quiet for a moment, thinking. We need evidence before we can do anything official. But let me make some calls, see what resources are available. In the meantime, keep watching. Keep notes. Time, dates, what you see and hear. After hanging up with Jerome, Ruby called her pastor. Pastor Collins, it's Ruby. I need the prayer team, but I also need action. Pastor Collins had known Ruby for 20 years. She was one of the strongest women in their congregation, always helping others, never asking for help herself. She was calling, it was serious. What can we do? There's a young mama and her baby girl next door who are in trouble. Real trouble. I think they're being kept from food, maybe being hurt. I need to know what the church can do to help them when the time comes. Consider it done. Sister Grace runs our family services ministry. She knows all the resources in the city. I'll have her call you within the hour. Ruby's next call was to her doctor's office. She'd been thinking about this part of her plan all night. Dr. Thompson, this is Ruby Washington. I need to ask you about something important. Dr. Thompson had been Ruby's doctor for 15 years. He trusted her judgment completely. I got a neighbor who I think might be malnourished. Her and her little girl. If I could somehow get them to see you, what would you need to help them? And what if they can't pay? Mrs. Washington, if someone is truly malnourished, that's a medical emergency. Bring them in. We'll figure out the payment later. But if you suspect abuse or neglect, we're mandated to report it. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. By noon, Ruby had her plan in place. Jerome would drive by the house several times during his patrol, documenting what he could see. Pastor Collins and Sister Grace were organizing food, clothes, and temporary housing if needed. Dr. Thompson was ready to see Denise and Amara immediately if Ruby could get them out of the house. Now came the hard part. Actually getting them out. Ruby had noticed that Robert left every day around 2 o'clock and didn't come back until evening. She'd also noticed that he always locked the front door from the outside, but she'd never seen him check the back door. These old houses were built the same way. If her back door key fit their back door? She waited until she saw Robert stumble down the street toward the corner store, then she grabbed her spare key and walked around to their backyard. The neighborhoods were built so close together that she could easily step from her yard to theirs. Her heart was pounding as she tried her key in their back door. It didn't fit. But the door wasn't locked. Ruby pushed it open slowly. Denise? Honey, it's Mrs. Ruby from next door. Are you okay? The silence that followed made her stomach drop. Then she heard a weak voice from upstairs. Mrs. Ruby? How did you? Never mind that now, baby. I'm coming up. What Ruby saw when she reached the bedroom made her gasp. Denise was lying on a mattress on the floor, so thin that Ruby could see the shape of her bones through her skin. Amara was curled up beside her, both of them looking like they hadn't eaten in days. Oh, sweet Jesus, Ruby whispered. How long has this been going on? He takes all the food, Denise said, her voice barely above a whisper. Says we don't deserve to eat. Says it's our fault he lost his job. Ruby's hands shook with anger, but her voice stayed calm. Can you walk, honey? I think so. But he'll be back soon. If he finds out you were here. He's not going to find out because you're not going to be here when he gets back. Can you and Amara come with me right now? For the first time in months, something like hope flickered in Denise's eyes. But they both knew Robert would come looking for them. And when he did, he'd be furious. Getting down the stairs was harder than Ruby expected. Denise could barely stand and Amara was so weak she kept stumbling. But determination and desperation are powerful forces, and slowly, carefully, they made their way to Ruby's house. Sit down, both of you, Ruby said once they were safely in her kitchen. Don't move until I tell you to. She started pulling food from her refrigerator and cabinets, soup, crackers, bananas, milk. Not too much at first. She'd learned from caring for her late husband during his illness that starving people needed to eat small amounts slowly or they'd get sick. Just a little bit at a time, she told them, warming up some chicken broth on the stove. We got to get your strength back gradually. While the soup heated, Ruby called Jerome back. They're here. And Jerome, it's worse than I thought. This woman and her baby girl are starving. Actually starving. I'm on my way. And Aunt Ruby? You did the right thing. Next, she called Dr. Thompson. Doctor, I got them. Can you see them today? They're in bad shape. Bring them in now. I'll clear my schedule. Denise kept looking toward the door, expecting Robert to burst through at any moment. He's going to find us, she whispered. He'll make us go back. He'll make it worse for running away. No, honey. He's not going to find you. And even if he does, he can't make you do anything. You're a grown woman with rights, and that baby girl has rights too. Ruby ladled small portions of broth into 2 bowls. The smell alone made Amara's eyes light up in a way Ruby hadn't seen since they'd arrived. Can I really eat it, Mama? Amara asked, looking back and forth between the soup and her mother's face. Denise started crying then. Not the quiet, hopeless tears she'd been crying for months, but deep, grateful sobs that shook her thin shoulders. Yes, baby girl. You can eat as much as you want. It was the first real meal they'd had in weeks. 20 minutes later, Jerome arrived in his police car, followed by Sister Grace in her church van. Ruby had called it exactly right. They would need official help and community support to make this work. Jerome took one look at Denise and Amara and immediately radioed for a medical unit. Ma'am, we need to get you and your daughter to a hospital, he told Denise gently. You're both showing signs of severe malnutrition. I can't pay for a hospital, Denise said, panic rising in her voice. We don't have insurance. Robert controls all the money. Sister Grace knelt down beside Denise's chair. Honey, you don't need to worry about money right now. We've got programs that can help. The church has an emergency fund. Dr. Thompson is waiting to see you, and he's not worried about payment. But what about Robert? When he comes home and finds us gone? Jerome answered that question. Mrs. Parker, based on what I'm seeing here, there are going to be charges filed. Neglect, endangerment, probably more. Your husband won't be coming home for a while. For the first time since Ruby had found them, Amara spoke up. Does that mean we don't have to be hungry anymore? The adults in the room all looked at each other, then back at this brave little girl who'd been through so much. No, sweetheart, Sister Grace said. You're never going to be hungry again. We're going to make sure of that. But even as they prepared to take Denise and Amara to get medical care, Ruby couldn't shake the feeling that Robert would find a way to cause more trouble. Men like him didn't just give up when they lost control. They got angry. They got dangerous. She was right to be worried. At 4:30 that afternoon, Robert came home to an empty house. At first, he thought maybe they were hiding from him, playing some kind of game. He searched every room, every closet, under every bed. Then he saw that some of their clothes were missing. The rage that filled him was unlike anything he'd felt before. How dare they leave? How dare they make him look like a fool? They belonged to him. They were his property, his responsibility to control. He grabbed his cell phone and started making calls, trying to figure out where they'd gone. Someone had to have seen them. Someone had to know something. It didn't take long for him to narrow it down to Mrs. Ruby next door. By the time Jerome's police unit pulled up to the house 2 hours later, Robert was already gone. But the damage he'd done to Ruby's front door and windows showed exactly how angry he was about losing control of his family. The manhunt for Robert Parker was about to begin. And Ruby was about to learn that doing the right thing sometimes came with a price. Dr. Thompson had seen cases of neglect before, but nothing quite like this. Denise had lost nearly 40 pounds from her already small frame. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, her electrolytes were completely out of balance, and her body was starting to shut down from lack of nutrition. 8-year-old Amara was in even worse shape for her size. Her growth had been stunted, her immune system was compromised, and she showed signs of cognitive effects from prolonged hunger. Mrs. Parker, Dr. Thompson said gently as he finished his examination, I need you to understand how serious this is. Another few weeks of this treatment and we might have lost you both. Denise nodded, still not quite believing she was safe. The hospital bed felt like luxury after months of sleeping on a thin mattress on the floor. Amara was in the bed next to her, finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, with 4 fluids helping to rehydrate her small body. The good news, Dr. Thompson continued, is that you're both going to recover completely. It'll take time and you'll need to follow a careful nutrition plan, but your bodies will heal. Sister Grace sat in the chair beside Denise's bed, holding her hand. And you won't be doing it alone. The church has arranged temporary housing for you and Amara. Safe housing where that man can't find you. But what if he does find us? Denise asked. You don't know Robert. When he gets angry? She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood. They'd all seen the photos Jerome had taken of Ruby's damaged property. Robert Parker was escalating, and desperate men were dangerous men. Jerome appeared in the doorway just as visiting hours were ending. "Ladies, I need to give you an update on the situation." He pulled up a chair and sat down. "Robert Parker has been charged with criminal neglect, endangerment of a minor, and domestic violence. There's also a restraining order in place. He's legally required to stay at least 500 feet away from you and Amara at all times." "But has he been arrested?" Sister Grace asked. Jerome's expression grew more serious. "Not yet. He's been evading us for 2 days now. But we will find him. And in the meantime, there's going to be a police presence wherever you're staying." That night, while Denise and Amara slept safely in the hospital, Robert was hiding in an abandoned house across town. He'd been drinking for 48 hours straight, and his anger had grown into something much darker. In his twisted mind, this was all their fault. They'd embarrassed him, made him look weak, turned the whole neighborhood against him. He'd shown them who was boss before. He'd show them again. Robert spent the next day watching the hospital from a distance, trying to figure out when they'd be released and where they'd go next. He saw the church van come and go. He saw the police cars. But he also saw the patterns, the routines, the moments when security might be lighter. He was making a plan. Meanwhile, Ruby was dealing with her own problems. Her insurance company was fighting the claim for her damaged property. Some of her neighbors were saying she should have minded her own business. A few people were even blaming her for stirring up trouble in the neighborhood. But Ruby didn't regret her decision for a second. Every time she thought about Amara eating weeds in the backyard, every time she remembered Denise's hollow eyes at that window, she knew she'd done exactly what needed to be done. "Let them talk," she told Jerome when he stopped by to check on her. "I've been in this neighborhood longer than most of them have been alive. I've seen real trouble, and I've seen people who just like to complain. This was real trouble. Any word from your insurance? They'll come around. And if they don't, the church is helping with repairs. Pastor Collins says the whole congregation wants to pitch in." Jerome smiled. "You know what, Aunt Ruby? I think you might have started something bigger than you realized." He was right. Word of what Ruby had done was spreading through the community. Other neighbors were talking about times they'd heard or seen things that didn't seem right but hadn't known what to do about it. The local news had picked up the story. The mayor's office was asking questions about support services for domestic violence situations. One act of courage was creating ripples throughout the entire city. But Robert Parker was still out there, still angry, and still planning his revenge. On the third night he made his move. The safe house was quiet when Robert found it. He'd followed the church van earlier that day, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to see where it went. The house was in a residential neighborhood, unmarked, looking just like any other family home on the street. Robert waited until after midnight, then crept around to the back of the house. His plan was simple. Get Denise and Amara, take them somewhere no one would find them, and show them what happened to people who tried to embarrass him. But as he approached the back door, floodlights suddenly blazed to life, illuminating the entire yard. A security system Ruby's nephew Jerome had insisted on installing began blaring an alarm that could be heard 3 blocks away. Within 2 minutes, police cars were surrounding the house from all directions. Robert ran, but there was nowhere to go. They found him hiding behind a neighbor's shed, drunk and carrying a kitchen knife he'd taken from the abandoned house where he'd been staying. "Robert Parker, you're under arrest," Jerome said as they cuffed him. "And this time you're not getting out on bail." Inside the safe house, Denise held Amara close as they watched through the window. For the first time in months, she knew with certainty that they were truly free. "Is the bad man going away, Mama?" Amara asked. "Yes, baby girl. The bad man is going away for a very long time." 3 months later, the transformation was remarkable. Denise had gained back 25 pounds and looked healthy for the first time in over a year. She'd found work as a receptionist at Dr. Thompson's medical practice, a job that came with health insurance and enough money to support herself and Amara comfortably. Amara had grown 2 inches and was thriving in her new school. Her teachers said she was bright, curious, and showed no lasting effects from her ordeal. She was making friends, joining activities, and most importantly, she never worried about food anymore. They'd moved into a small apartment near Ruby's neighborhood. Not too close. Denise needed her independence, but close enough that Ruby could still be part of their lives. Robert had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for child endangerment, domestic violence, and attempted breaking and entering. The judge had been particularly harsh, noting that his actions had nearly killed his own wife and daughter. "Mr. Parker," Judge Martinez had said during sentencing, "you took 2 people who should have been able to count on you for protection and care, and instead you used your power to harm them. This court considers that among the most serious breaches of trust possible. But the real changes went far beyond just one family. The story of Ruby's intervention had inspired the city to create a new program called Neighbor Watch, which trained community members to recognize signs of domestic violence and provided resources for safe intervention. Ruby became the program's first volunteer coordinator. Pastor Collins had expanded the church's family services ministry, working with other congregations throughout the city to create a network of safe houses and support services. Sister Grace was now coordinating efforts across 12 different churches. Dr. Thompson had partnered with local social services to create a program providing free medical care for victims of domestic violence, funded by donations from the community and grants from the state. The neighborhood itself had changed too. People talked to each other more, looked out for each other better. The story of what happened to Denise and Amara had reminded everyone that their actions, or lack of action, could make the difference between life and death for their neighbors. 6 months after that terrible morning when Amara had searched empty cabinets for food, she was helping Ruby plant flowers in her front yard. "Miss Ruby," Amara said as she carefully placed seeds in the soil, "my mama says you saved our lives." Ruby looked at this beautiful, healthy child who was growing stronger every day. "No, sweetheart. We all saved each other. That's what neighbors do." Denise walked over from their apartment building, carrying glasses of lemonade for everyone. She moved with confidence now, her head held high, her smile genuine and bright. "Ladies, what are we planting today?" she asked. "Sunflowers," Ruby replied. "They're strong flowers. They grow tall and bright, even when they start in difficult soil." Amara grinned. "Just like us, right, Miss Ruby?" "Exactly like us, baby girl. Exactly like us." As the sun set over their neighborhood, 3 generations of strong women worked together in the garden, planting seeds that would grow into something beautiful. The dark days were behind them now. The future was full of light, hope, and endless possibilities. And sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, Denise would look out her window at the neighborhood around her and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. Not just for Ruby's courage or Jerome's help, or the church's support or Dr. Thompson's care, but for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are people willing to step forward and say, "Not on my watch." That was the real miracle. Not that they'd survived, but that they'd found a community that refused to let them suffer alone. And now, they were part of that same community, ready to be the ones who stepped forward the next time someone needed help. The cycle of care continued, stronger than ever.